So I was going to have this video be the first of a two-part breakdown where I pick every single bowl game that I'm not planning on making dedicated videos for. However, this weekend, something else piqued my interest, and that was the general discussion surrounding Jaden Daniels winning the Heisman. Now, I think it's pretty clear that he was the best player in college football this year, and that got me thinking, what if the Heisman Trophy Award was actually given out to the most outstanding collegiate athlete every year? So I figured I'd go back, starting with the year that I was born, and pick the correct winner for the Heisman Trophy in every single year. So, with the intro out of the way, I'd like to say hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today we're going to go through the past 26 years of Heisman history and pick the correct winner. So let's start off with where I think the trophy was given out to the correct individual, starting with the most controversial Heisman Trophy ceremony of all time. The year that I was born, this award was handed out when I was less than 2 months old. So 1997, Charles Woodson absolutely was the best player in college football that year. It is not particularly a discussion. Peyton Manning was absolutely fantastic. He did not have the same type of season relative to his position that Charles Woodson did. He was the best player in college football that year. Similarly, 1998, Ricky Williams was also the best football player in college football. Matt Leinart in 2004, really kind of a weaker class, in my opinion, in terms of years. Certainly not the weakest, but Matt Leinart, I think, is on the lower end in terms of impressiveness for winning the Heisman Trophy. 2007, Tim Tebow, he didn't have the numbers, but he was very clearly the best player in college football. 2008, Sam Bradford, he was just better than everybody else. I didn't really want to say that Sam Bradford should have won the award because I kind of always felt like, especially growing up, that he didn't particularly deserve it. But he was the best player in college football that year. 2010, Cam Newton, open and shut, easiest Heisman Trophy of all time. 2017, Baker Mayfield, he had an absolutely incredible year. 2019, the only year that I think can rival 2010 for easiest Heisman Trophy to give out of all time. I put an asterisk at 2022 for Caleb Williams. That's because had Blake Corum been healthy, it should have been his award. However, since he was hurt, Blake Corum that is, giving Caleb Williams the Heisman was in fact the correct decision. And this year, Jaden Daniels from LSU was the best player in college football. It was close. Michael Penix had an absolutely outstanding year. And I think, honestly, if he had had that kind of year last year in 2022, he probably wins the award over Caleb Williams. So we are now going to go through every year that isn't listed here and go through each of that and say, okay, this is who I think should have won the award. But if you want to argue someone else, that's fine. I only have three where I'm not arguing with you in terms of who should have won the award. I think it's astonishingly clear and that these players were flat out and straight up robbed of Heisman trophies for one reason or another. And we're going to start with 1999 and then work our way forward. And this is how you know I went in my bag for this. In 1999, Ron Dane from Wisconsin won the Heisman Trophy, and he had a Heisman Trophy type of season, in my opinion. However, he did not have the greatest running back season in the history of college football. Deltha O'Neal had the greatest season in the history of defensive backs at the collegiate level in 1999. He played for Cal, and they weren't very good, but he was the best player in college football this year. He had 9 interceptions, 4 of which he returned for defensive touchdowns, and averaged almost 30 yards per return and added another 2 touchdowns on special teams. He had basically the same season as Charles Woodson, except better on the defensive side of the football. But since he played on a team that wasn't very good, nobody particularly wanted him to win the Heisman. But he was, beyond a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion, but you can argue whoever you want to, was the best player in college football in 1999. Moving on to the 2000 season, my pick for the Heisman Trophy Award is going to LaDainian Tomlinson from TCU. He had 369 attempts, 2,158 yards for 5.8 yards per carry, and 22 rushing touchdowns. And yes, Chris Weinke was impressive. He threw for 4,000 yards and 30-plus touchdowns in an era of college football where people didn't really throw the football like that all that much. However, if we were going off of actual film and watching them play football, of which I did my best to find highlights on YouTube so that I could make this argument, LaDainian Tomlinson was the better football player, and he, in my opinion, got robbed of a Heisman Trophy for the year 2000. Also, little known fact, Chris Weinke was 28 years old in the year 2000. He was born in 1972, so maybe he had a little bit more experience than everybody else and was a little bit more physically developed than everybody else. So that could also play into why he looked really good. 2001, Bears fans, look away, but Rex Grossman absolutely should have won the Heisman Trophy for this year. Eric Crouch is the worst football player ever to be a Heisman finalist, let alone win the award. And he had no business being anywhere near that trophy that year. He was a subpar football player. Now, Rex Grossman had a great year even by modern standards. So in the early 2000s, it was unbelievable. If you wanted to argue that David Carr should have won the Heisman this year, or hell, even Antoine Randall L., who was a better passer and runner of the football than Eric Crouch, I wouldn't be against that, which is why Rex Grossman isn't one of my three that I'm just not even taking opinions on. So if you wanted to make an argument for one of those players or somebody else who I didn't mention, then I'll listen to you. But I personally believe that it should have been Rex Grossman. Now, we're skipping a year. We'll get to 2002 towards the end of the video. But in 2003, for my money, Larry Fitzgerald was the best player in college football. And if I'm being honest with you, I think the only reason that Jason White won the award was because he played for a big name school in Oklahoma and played the quarterback position. I don't particularly think his Heisman Trophy season was all that impressive, and I think Larry Fitzgerald, especially considering the team around him, was clearly a better football player relative to his position. Which, if I'm being honest with you, is the only real fair way to figure out how good, objectively, a player is. Larry Fitzgerald had 92 receptions for 1,672 yards and 22 touchdowns. To put that in perspective, Devonta Smith in 2020, who we'll get to, but that's pretty far away here. Devonta Smith in 2020 had 117 receptions for 1,856 yards and 23 touchdowns. So, despite having 25 less receptions, he had almost the same amount of touchdowns and a comparable number of yards. So if he had 25 more receptions, and also Devonta Smith played more games than Larry Fitzgerald did that year, even though it was a COVID-shortened, quote-unquote, not really in the SEC, but everywhere else it was, season. So if Devonta Smith was good enough to win the Heisman, Larry Fitzgerald certainly was good enough to win the Heisman. 2005. This was Vince Young's trophy, and you will never convince me otherwise. This year, Vince Young became the first player in NCAA history to pass for 3,000 yards and rush for 1,000 yards. Now, it's become, relatively speaking, commonplace in modern college football, but this is a historic accomplishment. They had the best team in college football that year, and he was the best player on that team. He absolutely should have won this award. I get that Reggie Bush was electric and he had the whole ball passing the ball behind his back sort of play that went as viral as things could go without the internet really being a thing. And if you wanted to say that Reggie Bush justly won the award, it was later vacated, but I don't give a shit about that. If you want to say that Reggie Bush won the award justly, you can make that argument, and it is a legitimate argument. I'm not going to listen to it because Vince Young should have won the award, in my opinion. But it is a valid argument to make. 2006, Colt Brennan probably should have won this award. And don't get me started on Troy Smith, okay? Bro was like the 7th best quarterback in college football that year. He wasn't that good. Like, he's not even in a top 10 list of the best quarterbacks of the 2000s, okay? And he's certainly not even top 5 discussion for best quarterbacks at Ohio State. That might be, in my opinion, the most unjust Heisman Award in the history of giving it out, okay? Colt Brennan threw for 5,500 yards and 58 touchdowns on 73% completion percentage. He was the best player in college football. This is not a discussion. Like, if you want to say that because it was Hawaii and they played in the WAC, then fine, I don't give a shit. But Troy Smith should not have won the award. Brady Quinn was a better quarterback than him. Calvin Johnson had a better season than him and was a better player than him that year. Graham Harrell was a better quarterback than him. That kid out of BYU, whose name I can't remember and is probably twice my age, so I shouldn't be calling him a kid. Nevertheless, he was a better quarterback that year than Troy Smith. Anyway, I think Colt Brennan was very clearly the best player in college football this year. I mean, these are NCAA records that would stand for a significant amount of time. And if you wanted to make an argument for somebody else, then I'd listen to you, but I'm probably not going to be convinced. Now we're skipping ahead here a little bit to 2011. This one I'm much less militant about than Troy Smith. If you want to say that RG3 deserved this award, you can go for it, and he probably did. Like, he absolutely deserved the Heisman Trophy. I just think Andrew Luck was a better football player than him. This is the first time where I can sort of speak on things with actual real memories of football and not just kind of hazy childhood type of stuff. And I vividly remember thinking that Andrew Luck was going to win the Heisman Trophy Award. Now, I was 14, I think, and didn't particularly watch a whole lot of the games, but I do know that Jim Harbaugh was a Michigan guy, and being a Michigan fan, I was like, oh, I want to watch the Michigan guy coach. So I did make a bit of an effort to look online and figure out the Stanford sort of things. So I may be a little bit biased here, but I do think Andrew Luck was the best player in college football this year. I don't particularly think there is a discussion for who was best in the country other than Andrew Luck and RG3. I think it was very clearly those two guys. And I do think that the narratives surrounding RG3 were a little bit better, and the Heisman Trophy Award in real life is very much an award about narratives and how good your story is. So I think that's probably why he won. But if you want to make me the argument that RG3 was a better player than Andrew Luck, I would listen to it. I probably won't be convinced, but you could certainly try. And, oh boy, 2012. You will never not convince me that Manti Te'o was the best player in college football this year. He was absolutely electric. He was sideline to sideline as a linebacker. He doesn't particularly have the sack stats to show just how good of a blitzer he was, but he was a very good blitzer, and 7 interceptions are a little bit overblown because about 2 or 3 of them were luck, but he was fabulous in coverage as a coverage linebacker this year. He was the best player in college football, in my opinion. However, this year there was sort of a really weird like momentum and like storyline where a freshman was going to win the award for the first time, and it was like, it's about time a true freshman, or well, actually he was a redshirt freshman, I think, it's about time that a freshman won the award. And I don't know why that was a narrative to begin with, but it was. And then it just sort of devolved into Johnny Manziel is going to win because he's a freshman. And I don't think he deserved to win. I think Manti Te'o was the best player in college football that year. But fret not, Johnny Manziel or Texas A&M fans, because in 2013, he was the best player in college football. He was significantly better as a football player in 2013 than 2012. A lot of his stats weren't legitimate, in my opinion, in 2012. A lot of them were padding, if you want to call it that. I don't like that phrase because it has a lot of connotations surrounding it, but they weren't earned through tough games all that much. He had the spectacular game against Alabama, but then that was about it. In 2013, he produced against everybody and looked significantly better doing it. It's also worth noting that even though this team did have quite a bit of NFL talent on it, they weren't a particularly good football team. I think if you take Johnny Manziel off of this team and just put average quarterback play in it, I'm not sure they make a bowl game. So I think Johnny Manziel really elevated this team this year and became an icon for people of my generation while doing it. 2014 is another one that's pretty clear to me. If you want to argue Marcus Mariota or whoever, then fine. You can do that all you want. But Melvin Gordon had maybe the second best season a running back has had in the history of college football this year, and definitely deserved the award more than Marcus Mariota. I mean, he ran for 2,587 yards on 343 attempts for 7.5 yards per carry. He had 29 rushing touchdowns and 32 total touchdowns. We were talking about him and Barry Sanders this year. And anytime you are mentioned in the same breath as the dude that had the greatest single season in the history of college football, you should win the Heisman Trophy. I think that's kind of the standard. I think he should have won the Heisman Trophy. In 2015, I also think it was a fairly open and closed Heisman Trophy discussion, but that had more to do with the fact that there wasn't particularly anybody that had like an all-time great sort of season, and that includes Christian McCaffrey, who I believe should have won the award. But he was undeniably a better football player than Derrick Henry this year. Derrick Henry won because voters in the South will sooner shit into a paper bag and eat it than vote for anybody who isn't in the South. Christian McCaffrey had 2,019 yards and 645 receiving yards while adding another 1,000 yards in punt and kick returns. He was the best player in college football this year. Now, he didn't have the touchdown stats that Derrick Henry had, but if you flip on the tape, and by the way, both of these players are first ballot Hall of Famers in the NFL, okay? But if you flip on the tape, Christian McCaffrey was the better runner of the football and catcher of the football than Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry didn't even attempt to return on punt or kickoffs. So I just think he was the more versatile and better all-around player than Derrick Henry. If you want to make an argument for Derrick Henry or anybody else, you can. I don't particularly think there is a good one. 2016. This one was close. This was genuinely close. I almost put Lamar Jackson into the deserved to win the award, like where the voters got it right section of this video. It was very close. But I do think that Deshaun Watson probably should have won this award. Things that happened later on in his life have no bearing on what happened while he was in college, okay? So when we're talking about just on the field stuff, I think it's a pretty close comparison because I think you can inarguably say that Lamar Jackson was a better runner of the football and a more explosive athlete than Deshaun Watson. However, I think you can say definitively that Deshaun Watson was also the better passer of the football than Lamar Jackson at this point in their careers. And Deshaun Watson won the head-to-head, so I kind of just feel like Deshaun Watson probably should have won this award. I mean, he had almost 4,600 yards, 41 touchdowns, 67 completion percentage, over 600 rushing yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns. So he had 50 total touchdowns, which is an absurd number, and 5,200 total yards, which is on par with runaway Heisman Trophy seasons. So yeah, I'm going to stick with Deshaun Watson for 2016. 2018 is up next, and retroactively, I am going to give this award to Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama. I don't honestly have an argument here for why Kyler Murray shouldn't have won the Heisman Trophy award, but I just think Tua was better than him. I think, Kyler Murray did have the running threat and that sort of thing, but I think Tua had the better season overall. I don't believe that you should be able to say that somebody was a better player than someone because the first player can do stuff that the second player can't. I'm not comfortable with that sort of argument. And to illustrate what I mean by that, it's pretty simple. Calvin Johnson is a better receiver than Jerry Rice because Calvin Johnson can jump over 3 people and make a catch, and Jerry Rice can't do that because Jerry Rice was 6 foot and Calvin Johnson was 6'5". So since Calvin Johnson can do things that Jerry Rice can't do, Calvin Johnson was a better receiver than Jerry Rice. And that's borderline sacrilege because Jerry Rice put up video game numbers in real life that are very hard to surpass in the actual Madden football video game. So I think that's a pretty good example to kind of show you what I mean when you try to make an argument like that. So if you want to say that Kyler Murray won the award justly and Tua shouldn't have won the award, I'm not going to argue with you. I think that's a perfectly fair and legitimate point of view to have. I just think Tua was a better football player than Kyler Murray that year. Similarly, in 2020, I think Trevor Lawrence was the best player in college football, not Devonta Smith. I think that I think this Heisman Trophy in 2020 became a sort of thing where there was so much momentum for like, hey, this is a weird year. Let's give it to a position that doesn't normally win the Heisman Trophy. Let's not give it to a quarterback this year. And I think that you can sort of fall into a trap like that, but Devonta Smith absolutely deserved to have the Heisman Trophy, okay? He had an absolutely insane season. However, had Jalen Waddle not broken his ankle, we probably never have Devonta Smith get anywhere near the Heisman Trophy this year, and Trevor Lawrence probably wins it by default because he was the best player in college football that year. And Devonta Smith wasn't even the best wide receiver on his team. He was the best healthy wide receiver on his team, but he was not the best wide receiver on his team. So up next, we have the first of the 3 Heisman Trophy awards that I am not going to be fielding arguments on. To me, there is no other opinion to be had other than these 3 players deserved to have the Heisman Trophy. And I think I'm going to go from least controversial to most controversial here. So for 2002, I have Terrell Suggs from Arizona State deserving to win the Heisman Trophy. He set multiple NCAA records that have not gotten anywhere close to being broken since then, including but not limited to 24 sacks and 31.5 tackles for a loss. He won just about every single defensive award that you can possibly win, along with being a unanimous first-team All-American. There are defensive players that played 5 years with a COVID eligibility and played in north of 50 games that don't have 24 sacks and 31 tackles for a loss, and Terrell Suggs did it in 1 year. He was undeniably and indisputably the best player in college football in 2002. Up next is 2009, and we're going to talk about Ndamukong Suh from Nebraska. First and foremost, we have to talk about the player who actually won the award, and that was Mark Ingram. And Mark Ingram flat out and straight up did not, in any facet of the game, in any conceivable manner, have a Heisman caliber season. If there was ever a season in the history of the sport where they were going to give it to a defensive player, it should have been this year. Ndamukong Suh had 12 sacks, 20 and a half tackles for a loss, 85 total tackles, and 1 interception as a defensive tackle who was getting triple teamed consistently. He remains, to this day, on the short list of most dominant players in the history of college football. Buddy, outside of the state of Alabama, who was a better football player in college, Mark Ingram or Ndamukong Suh? I think it would be like 99% Ndamukong Suh. He was the best player in college football this year and had maybe the best season a defensive tackle has ever had in the history of college football. He was absolutely absurdly dominant. Now we move on to easily my most controversial choice here. And Kenneth Walker absolutely should have won the Heisman Trophy in 2021. Bryce Young won the award by default because Kenneth Walker had a bad game against Ohio State where they only gave him like 9 carries and he had 41 yards because the game was over 1 minute into the game. He only had 263 rush attempts, and you've seen the other running back rush attempts here on this field. If he had, in this video, so if he had that kind of production, if they had allowed him to carry the ball that much, he would easily be over probably 23 touchdowns and 2,000 rushing yards. And it would look like the other Heisman Trophy running back seasons that we've talked about so far here. But what really sells the fact that Kenneth Walker should have won this award is the eye test. If you had watched him this year, you would know that there was not a game being played that year where he was not the best player on the field. And that includes Ohio State that had Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and CJ Stroud. He was the best player on the field. They didn't give him any opportunities, but he was still the best player on the field. But that's just me, and what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to like the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point, or you just have something to say, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section below. So with the outro out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.